to the Clean and Sustainable Urban Mobility session, where we have a distinguished lineup of speakers to share their perspectives on how we as city builders and policy practitioners need to rethink urban mobility in our cities. My name is Carolyn Kim, a senior director from the Pembina Institute, a clean energy think tank in Canada, and I have the pleasure to be your moderator today. Last fall at COP26, we saw governments and parties across sectors come together to accelerate climate action and to achieve common goals set out in the Paris Agreement to limit global warming by 1.5 degrees. Decarbonizing the transportation is incredibly important. It's one of the most important areas to tackle if we are to achieve this end. Globally, road transport accounts for about 12% of total greenhouse gas emissions. And when we look at the city level, emissions from mobility is one of the most emissions intensive sectors. Research shows that urban centers generate 70% of this total. Why? Because cities are where more than half of the world's population lives. Now, it's not just about the question of curbing urban GHG emissions and air pollution and traffic congestion from people moving in their cars, but it's also because of the movement of goods. In fact, the World Economic Forum estimates that the demand for urban last mile deliveries is expected to grow by 78% by 2030, leading to 36% more delivery vehicles in the world's top 100 cities. This level activity would translate to about 25 million tons of CO2 emissions annually by 2030. So don't just think about that, but think about the traffic congestion that would worsen and rise by over 21% because of last mile deliveries. But don't lose hope. We have effective interventions that exist today. And visionary and innovative efforts are underway in cities in Canada and in Europe. So without further ado, let's hear from our distinguished panelists on how exactly we can create more sustainable, inclusive, and livable societies. And I'm pleased to introduce you to our panelists. We have Maria Tavakidis, CEO of EIT Urban Mobility, Edward Hamilton, co-founder and president of SmartPoint, Michael Jacob, founder and CEO of Automotion, Olivier Marcil, vice president, public affairs from Alstrom Group, and Vincent Dusson, representing the Montreal Urban Innovation Lab. So let's get started with the Canadian perspective first. Vincent, what would you say are the top challenges that Canadian cities are facing, whether it's in the city of Montreal or Vancouver or Toronto? And what are the projects and investment opportunities to address this? Over to you.
Hi, it's a pleasure for me to be here today. It's a really interesting topic. I'm really passionate about it. So yeah, there's a lot to say about all the challenge we have in mobility. We talk a lot about it. Montreal has a specific challenge, but it's shared with the main metropolitan city, Toronto, Vancouver. Basically, we're in North America, so we have a really dense core, but also a lot of car ownership. So what we see a lot in the last few years, really this fight for the space, public space, to try to better share that space between all the needs that are growing with different sort of mobility. Lately, with the pandemic, for sure, we face cost of housing that are increasing a lot, so that they push family outside of far from downtown. So it's difficult to implement sustainable mobility when people have to go far away from the city. This pandemic, for sure, also, and we see how it's difficult, but there's great opportunity because this lack of public space with the parking usage. So that's how we can mitigate and densify the city even more to create more affordable housing for people. For sure, the pandemic created also disruption for the public transit with the work from home, which is an opportunity in terms of sustainable mobility, but in the short and midterm create a challenge for the financing of the public transit. And we have to adapt also in how we serve the needs of the people. It's important to mention also the delivery emission. It's growing since the last decade with globalization, and it's really tough to reduce emission for every truck. So there's a lot of effort being done on that side. So in terms of opportunity, we see a lot of effort with electrification of the public transport. There's also effort being done with electric cars. There's even mandate to phase out the sales of gas cars in the next decade. Sustainable logistic is growing with the last mile delivery with cargo bike, but also we see slowly some electrification on the small and heavy truck. So it will be really interesting in the next few years how things are going. There's a lot of effort being done in the mobility as a service and improving the experience of buying a ticket for the transit. There's a lot of expectation of the user, of the public system user on that side. And for sure, active mobility and new mobility are really growing since a few years. So there's a lot of interest on that side. So I can maybe spend a bit of time that is left to mention some specific Montreal project. I'm part of the Smart City Challenge. Montreal is awarded for Infrastructure Canada a project around integrated mobility, mobility data in the 15-minute city. So we do a lot of experimentation and pilot around that. This year will be also an important year for Montreal since the RAM, it's a light train subway automated, a bit like Vancouver, that will open its first segment this year. We have a rapid bus system also opening this year. We start the work on the Blue Line metro, that extension. We start also the RFP to buy more than 1,000 electric bus for the whole province, but it will be led by our public transit operator in Montreal. And we also pushing a lot for the electric charging network. And for sure, as I mentioned, the new mobility is growing. Big C is adding more electric bike, Communauto also adding cars and some electric cars. So a lot of going on in Montreal in Canada right now. Thank you for your time.
Absolutely, that is an understatement. A lot going on. You named off a lot of challenges and the kinds of projects that you're advancing to address them. Maria, I'm going to go over to you now because I can't imagine that the challenges that Vincent raised and the kinds of initiatives that he's undertaking in Montreal and what we're seeing in Canada is different from that which is happening in European cities. So why don't you give us the perspective on what's happening today in terms of challenges and solutions?
Thank you, Carolyn. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. So we don't very often have the opportunity to have this exchange across continents. And the challenge that we are all facing is a joint challenge. So we have one planet, and this fight against climate change, the drive towards sustainable mobility, that's one mission. And everything that we heard from Vincent, we could, just transfer to European cities, and there are very similar activities going on. And it's so important that we exchange on our experiences from those activities so that we can learn fast from each other. And this global collaboration is really key. So thanks a lot for that. So this said, you might know 75% of the European population lives in cities. So therefore, urban mobility is, or to transform urban mobility into a sustainable form of mobility is important to drive the well-being of citizens, but then also, of course, to drive mitigation of climate change. So the transport sector, and I think, Carolyn, you summarize actually very well also the complex challenges that we're facing in the sector. So it's a sector where we struggle a lot to reduce the carbon footprint and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, transport is the only sector where greenhouse gas emissions have been rising in the past years. So the incremental change that we have been seeing in the past years is not enough. So we need really radical transformation towards net neutrality of the transport sector. And the European Green Deal is very clear on this. So transport emissions will have to be reduced by 55% by 2030 and 90% by 2050, so almost net neutrality. And we have a European sustainable and smart mobility strategy, which aim is to make all modes sustainable and to ensure that there are sustainable alternatives available in the short term, and to ensure that we incentivize the use of those alternatives. So the alternatives being, of course, mass transit. So we've heard from Vincent, most of the activities are in the area of public transport, of mobility as a service, active mobility, e-mobility. So these are the sustainable modes that we have to incentivize. And since the start of the pandemic, actually, key steps have been taken to provide also a financial stimulus for those green actions. And the EU has allocated almost 700 billion euros to the green economic recovery. And that money is available over the next few years to the member states to support green investments. And the member states must spend a minimum of 37% of this money on green investments and reforms, as well as 20% on digital. So this shows you where the funding allocation is steering towards. And what does it mean concretely? It means that, for instance, by 2030, there will be, or there have to be, at least 30 million zero-emission vehicles in operation on European roads, compared to only 3.5 today. So this shows you within just 7 years, there is a tremendous leap that we have to make. 100 European cities will have to be climate neutral, at least 100. And we have none being climate neutral today. So 100 European cities becoming net neutral within 7 years. So that's a very big ambition that we have to achieve in the next 7 years. So how we will achieve this, and now here comes a bit of the silver lining, because I think it is clear what are the key levers for that. So first and foremost, it requires innovation and collaboration across all sectors. So only through collaboration at all levels between industry, research, the public sector, municipalities, the cities really being at the forefront of innovation and of transformation. Only with this can we achieve our goals. And then secondly, an impact-driven allocation of funding. And on collaboration, maybe you allow me to introduce my organization, which is all about collaboration. It's the EIT Urban Mobility, which is funded under the Horizon Europe program. And Horizon Europe is the EU's key funding program for research and innovation. It has a budget of around 96 billion euros for the period of 21 to 2027. And EIT Urban Mobility itself is the leading European knowledge and innovation community around urban mobility. And we bring together right now more than 250 partners across the whole value chain of urban mobility. And we facilitate collaboration between cities, regions, industry, big and small, startups, universities, research institutions. So with the mission of accelerating change towards more sustainable mobility and livable spaces. So how do we do that? We fund projects and facilitate projects around important themes. So we give seed funding. We do events for knowledge exchange, best practice sharing, matchmaking between the different players on concrete activities to deploy innovative solutions in cities. We make introductions between companies, especially small and medium-sized companies and startups with the cities on innovative solutions to help them deploy them and speed up the time to market for those solutions. And of course, help them also to navigate the European funding landscape and tap into European funding opportunities, but also national funding opportunities. And so just to give you an idea, in the past 2 years now, we have supported more than 60 innovation projects and 120 startups. We also invest in promising startups. We have trained 50 master students. We have our own master school programs, 50 doctoral candidates, and have almost or above 8,000 course learners now in 2021, and more to come. So, and one very important point to make as well is that cities, and I think I mentioned that, so cities are really pivotal in their role regarding the transformation. So for this, the EU also has a program on the net neutral cities, so a project called Net Zero Cities, which actually supports this mission to make 100 cities climate neutral, with a platform to consult the cities to help them in their systemic change, but also with funding for large-scale pilots and deployments. So this is, I could talk for hours, but you don't want that. We want to have time to discuss as well. So this was a bit of a sneak into the European perspective.
Thanks so much for that. And what a great overview of the imperative that is in front of us, and the challenge of getting 100 cities to net zero by 2050. So
by 2030.
By 2030. That is way more ambitious than what we have in Canada. The City of Toronto, for example, has one of the most ambitious climate targets, and they're achieving net zero by 2040. I'd like to hear from the other panelists. Edward, let's start with you. You know, how do we get to, what kind of solutions do we need to help these cities achieve their net neutrality goals?
Yeah, no, thanks. For me, a big area is last mile logistics. No, it's just not sustainable. It's not working. Particularly post-pandemic, we've seen more people are buying online. That is including more delivery trucks. No, the statistics that you said are alarming, but true as well. No, that this is what's happening now. And so it has to be solved. No, and I think really the cities need to take a step in helping that. No, traffic congestion, you know, at 40% of traffic congestion throughout the weekday is created by the movement of goods, and CO2 emissions by a lot of these diesel vans is really clogging up our cities. No, so that's where SmartPoint, that's where we focus, that's where we see we can make the biggest change, is by working on a universal solution. No, so working with cities to come up with a universal using you know, high volume, quick delivery electric vehicles, which are delivering into smart points, which are effectively lockers that are positioned on the streets, so anybody can use them. And what that means is it's like a public transport, if you will, for packages. So just like a bus does a set route and delivers people delivers people at the bus stops, well, here in SmartPoint we're following the same idea, but we're delivering packages. No? And to give you some idea, with these sort of efficient delivery routes using electric vehicles, you can now deliver about 600 packages in an hour with electric vehicles. and dropping off about 60 packages in a minute per stop. So that's where we see the real value, reducing the traffic of the diesel vans coming into the city, stopping them at the border of the city and moving it in. And it has to be universal. It is open for anybody to move goods. So this is not a logistics company for the e-commerce. No, we really support the local commerce. Circular economy is really important as well. Know that we're moving the goods around the city, not just bringing them into the city. And so that's where we're really focused on working with cities on that.
You raised such a great point about the need to focus on urban logistics. And I know Montreal is really progressive in that area. In Canada, we're seeing e-commerce shopping really skyrocket. And since 2016, Canadians who are shopping online has grown by 350%. So you raise a good point, and really glad we always look to Europe and what European cities are doing when it comes to urban freight. So thanks for sharing that. Olivier, I want to turn it over to you because you have a different perspective here at Alstrom. So what do you think are the key solutions to help meet net neutrality?
Yeah, well, I think Edward touched on it, and Vincent as well. We need to move faster on mass transit, right? So we've talked about that there's heavy trends right now all around the world. Urbanization is one. Obviously, movements of goods and person, it's another one. And demography, right? Like it keep growing and growing and growing. So those trends are there to stay. And the question is like, how can we make sure that the transportation sector will keep up and to respond positively to those challenges? And we know when we look at our ambitious objective, I must say, and Caroline, you've talked about Toronto, but like now cities, societies, enterprises, states, like everyone is aiming at the same goals, net zero 2050, different, I would say, milestone in between, first base being 2030 for most of them. How are we going to get there? When we saw that over the last 20 years, like GHG coming from the transportation sector kept growing. And so we need to address those challenges and in different ways, depending if you're in Europe or in Canada or in the United States, it's not necessarily the same. Well, Vincent talked about that, like Canada, it's a car land. That's what it is. Always been like that. And it's very tough to see any change on that at the short term. Some might be aware there's a debate right now in Quebec City about adopting a tramway as a solution, being the spine of the new public transportation sector. Well, social acceptability around this, it's not clear yet. And at the same time, they're talking about, like building a complete new tunnel, highways, to bring more cars from the suburbs to the city. So you just see that there's still no consensus right now about how we can approach the shift in the modal shift in terms of transportation. So to me, I think we need to inspire ourselves in Canada from what we're seeing in Europe. And it's just normal, right? Like the demography is not the same, geography is not the same, like we have huge spaces, it's large countries, large distance. It's not the same thing than Europe. But to me, I think it's to push on what the current governments, Quebec, Ontario, federal governments are doing right now. It's to invest in infrastructure. I think it's critical. We've saw leapfrog over the last couple of years. In Toronto, for instance, we see that GO expansion networks coming around. Montreal, Vincent talk about it, like the REM is coming around. We've talked about tramway in Quebec City as well, the SkyTrain expansion in Vancouver. So we need to continue, invest in infrastructure. I think it's important. The other thing is that we need to favor rail. We need to favor, obviously I'm preaching for my business and saying so, but like it's just facts are facts are facts. Rail is still today the cleanest mode of transportation by passenger, by kilometer, bar none. So we need to invest in rail more. And so it means metro cars, it means trams, it means LRTs, it means also suburbs, regional trains. We need to do more in Canada about that. And then the last thing is like, we need to be early adopters of new technology. How are we going to get to 2050? That's a big question. Are we going to get to 2050 goals right now if we do not turn ourselves right now toward new technology? We're talking about, first of all, like probably one of the easiest one is digitalization and automatization of transportation mode. On the current infrastructure, you can increase your capacity up to 30% just in making your trains automatics. So, and that's just normal. You can have more train, you know, more departure, and arriving on time, less disruptive event that could come from the human factor being involved in that. So that's something that we should think about, you know, controlling with AI and, you know, with digitalization, the flux of traffics around the city, not just from a rail perspective, but cars with rails, with planes, with taxis and everything. So that's I would say some kind of a low-hanging fruit. The other one is to go toward low to zero emission car, and I will have the opportunity to come back about that. But it's clear to me that electrification is important, like especially in Canada, where we have a lot of hydroelectricity, right? Green energy, but also battery trains. And there are strategies that are being pushed by our leaders right now, our governments right now, about, you know, developing a new ecosystem on batteries. You need alternative to diesel, so hydrogen is also another opportunity. But, you know, when we look at the behavior of our agencies, for a lot of good and bad reasons, you know, they are very, very conservative in the choice they are making. And when we think about public agencies, you think about government, right? So how can we make sure that the ambition that our leaders are communicating to the public, like being very bold on ambition, will trickle down to make sure that the one that made the real decision on the ground, you know, like to adopt those technologies that will fuel and help to push to achieve those goals, will percolate in adopting, getting away from diesel and going toward low to zero emission technologies. So that would say a bit like the trajectory that our cities in Canada should take. And I believe that there's a lot of good example right now in Europe that we can get inspired by.
Thanks so much for your comments there, and appreciate that it's not just about electrification, but also about mode shift. Because if we're not getting cars off the road, we're not really going to achieve the end state that we're looking for. Finally, Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you. What's your sentiment on the kinds of solutions that's going to get us to net neutrality in European cities?
Yeah, so thanks. So for us, we are perfectly aligned on that. You know, the key thing is to, you know, get people leave their cars at home. And for us, that means making them a shift to really low to zero carbon means of transportation. And in our case, it's active mobility and cycling. That is where we are active. Of course, a lot of European cities, not just European cities, have major programs now to encourage more people to get on bikes. And very often that means infrastructure investments, building, extending cycle networks, which no doubt is the key thing, right? It's fundamentally important to growing the adoption. But of course, you know, such programs takes time and cost quite a bit of money. So what we would encourage the cities to do is also to look beyond, let's say, the measures that they can take in this sort of physical space, and also look for you know, for solutions and for tools in the digital sphere, right? And that's where we are active. So what we've been building, and there are a couple of other examples now in Europe, is a mobile app for promoting urban cycling, right? By combining the advice to give the people in terms of, you know, finding safe and quiet routes around through gamification and modification and motivation features, we want to make it easier for people, especially the newcomers, to actually get started on bikes and then kind of turn the cycling into, let's say, a regular habit, so that they more often use the bike when they need to get somewhere, right? So, the good thing about this is that this is a solution that can be, deployed very fast, right, at the fraction of cost of the big infrastructure extension programs. And of course, it would never replace the need to, build that infrastructure, but it can really help people and cities to make the most of what they already have, right? So every city, most cities have some infrastructure, and so these digital tools can actually help, making the best use of that or what's already there, and at the same time, by collecting data, actually help, making better decisions how to improve that physical infrastructure and close the whole sort of improvement loop. So our app, Cyclers for Cities, been adopted by a couple of cities, including EU capitals, Prague and Dublin, and helped tens of thousands of people get on bikes. So I think that's something, a solution that is, as I said, rapid to deploy and very cost effective. It can help actually increase the return on investment on this big infrastructure development program. So that would be my advice for cities. Of course, make every effort to make the conditions for cycling and active mobility better, but also try to see and look for some complementary measures that can make their investments more effective.
Thanks for that. I think, across all the issues that were raised today, whether it's the need to electrify our vehicles, light duty to medium and heavy duty trucks and buses, to cycling and active transportation or urban logistics, Maria touched on this point, and you all have throughout the session today, is the need for collaboration to really accelerate actions on all fronts. And so maybe in a few words, if I can just open it up to the panelists, and maybe you can share what are some key innovative ways in which we need to collaborate to really get going on our net neutrality goals.
Maybe I can start saying we touch a bit about the data. I think mobility as a service is the technology exists, but we know that the challenge also is to share data between public and private sector. So right now there's a lot of need. We talked about urban logistics also. In Montreal, we have really few data that can help us really understand how we can tackle that. So for me, I think in terms of collaboration, data sharing is a big, really important.
Maybe. Okay, Edward, go ahead. You were first.
I was just going to quickly say, I think the tender process could be improved in the sense of technology now is very quick to deploy, and I think cities should be choosing multi-technologies and then using the data, as Vincent said, to understand what's working, how it's deploying, and then scale. No, so quite often I think you try one and then try another, but I think there should be a more of a collaborative approach of trying various technologies for solving the same issue, and tracking and responding to that and iterating a little bit of the solution which fits the cities.
Yeah, I would like to come back to this, to the role of the cities, because it's so pivotal. So putting cities in the center means also to put them in the middle of the innovation process, because otherwise you will never shorten the time to market. So there has to be from beginning to end this close exchange between the municipalities, starting from their needs and what they want to achieve, and the innovators on the other side, the companies, the researchers, to find the solution. So an example of how we do that. So and that was an experimentation from our side, because we are innovating basically the way we innovate. is a concept we call Raptor, and that's a call where we put out funding for cities and their teams, a team of where they have support by consultancies or companies, where the cities define their challenges. So that could be, for instance, one that we selected now, one city is Tel Aviv. So they have within their district in their city, they have the problem, they have a very high ratio of seniors to youngsters, so many seniors, and they need transport within this district. So how to shift that from the private car to a shared mode of mobility. So do this last mile on-demand transport for seniors. We don't have a solution yet, but now the cities will be the owners of the challenge, and will work with startups or SMEs to develop a solution for that. And hopefully then that can scale in the city if successful, or connectivity of boat traffic in Istanbul with the land-based mode of transport. So that's another challenge that we are now addressing. So short experimentation. So these are projects of 6 months that will help both the city and the company or companies who offer solutions to create win-win situations. And where we also are more tolerant to risk and innovation, so that cities will also accept that there might be failure, but they will learn along the process. They will learn what works, what doesn't, how they need to also maybe adapt their policies and the environment for innovations to flourish.
Mm-hmm. Michael, I see you you're nodding your head there. You want to jump in?
Well, and absolutely confirm what was said, right? I really think that it's about, being from the city perspective, being a bit more agile in piloting new approaches and innovative solutions, and making it faster, doing smaller things, but more of them and in parallel. And in the process of that also, I think lowering the barrier for new small innovative companies to actually enter that kind of a innovation cycle, because I think that's both good for the cities because they might discover new ways of solving the problems, but it's also very important for those companies to actually better understand the needs, what works, what not, and iterate on their solutions. So I think absolutely making it easier to pilot innovative approaches, and then based on their impact to scale those that looks promising.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As we wind down our session today, I'm hopeful that you can share your vision of the net neutral city. And in a few words, if you can just share your call to action to other planners, city builders, policy practitioners who are working on this very challenge or common goal to scale up climate action. Olivier, let's start with you, then Edward, and then we'll move to the other panelists.
Well, I think, or like, if I'm taking the transportation aspect of cities, right? But I think we have to massively move toward electrification. Like if we compare what's happening in Europe, like networks, like by and large in Europe, like over 50% electrified already, right? And like we feel that it's all hands on deck for the remaining 50%, right? That it's non-electrified to find new solution. In Canada, like remove the subway cars, like it's 100% non-electrified network, right? So like there's a massive effort to get there. And if the budget cannot follow, we need to think, as I said, alternatives, and alternatives exist. Battery trains exist. It runs with passenger on it. Hydrogen train, Alstom has a hydrogen train that is in service in Germany for the last 4 years. 4 years, and those technologies are not on this side of the ocean right now. So, to me, I think that should be the vision, and the governments, all levels of government, should work better together, municipal to province to feds, and also in a true exchange transparency with the private sector that has that expertise that can bring in. Very quickly, my only, I would say, call to action, it's do lead, move fast, even if imperfect, right? But if you wait for the perfect condition, total social acceptability, total funding, you know, like a perfect technology, we're gonna miss our targets. Collectively, we're gonna miss it big time, and that's will be a shame.
Great sense of urgency there, Edward.
Yeah, no, it's a great question and exciting to answer, really. I'm a big believer in the shared, the rental sort of community and circular economy. I think ultimately, if we want to get to net neutrality, we have to reduce our production and our consumption and increase our movement and our circular economy and our sharing capabilities. And I'm excited to be part of those cities as they grow, and that's happening not just in mobility, but across all different sectors. So I think it's important that the cities create the framework for that to happen, you know? So that we can actually become shared a lot quicker. And my call to action, well, obviously the most important one would be reach out to Smart Point, we can help, but perhaps another one with a little bit more in line with what Maria was saying. Was really happy to hear the EU has given themselves a really short window to get change. And when you give yourself that short window, you have to act faster. And most of the unicorns that we see and we always look and marvel at, they are changing the world in 2 to 5 years. No, it's not a 20-year process for these unicorns. And cities can think the same. They can be like a unicorn. They don't have to be a long, slow corporate. So shorten that time frame of getting things changed. And yeah, and let's see what we can do. It's really exciting.
Great. Vincent, over to you, 1 minute or less, please.
Yeah, I will emphasize maybe on the walkable city, the connected city. So we want to have everything, the 15th city concept. Minute city is really interesting, but we have to make sure, as you mentioned, that we have also access to the whole potential of the city. So that's really important, because we have basically to build a more European city, transform our city, because we need density to be able to have good transit and a good option of mobility.
Great. Maria.
Yeah, so very short, I guess. Okay, so I loved everything that's been said, and I won't repeat it. So many points that are really, you know, so important to me as well. So my vision is healthy cities. So healthy cities in terms of being for the well-being of the citizens and the planet. And the very short version of that is actually what has been mentioned, the 15-minute green city. So having within 15 minutes walking all everyday amenities, school, culture, doctors, work, shops, etc., to really reduce the need to take your car and drive somewhere. And being, well, a mayor or a high-level politician in these times is a really tough job that I think we have to acknowledge. So it's not on me to give them advice, but so I think what has been said is so important. So setting ambitious targets for the cities and short-term targets. We should not talk about 2050, because 2050, our planet might be, you know, over the tipping points, over all tipping points, if we don't take the short-term action and take bold actions. I think that has been mentioned by Olivier. Not being afraid of pushback and eliminating all blind spots. There cannot be any blind spots. All sectors have to contribute. We're not talking enough about food. I mean, this is about mobility, but I think food is such an important area where we are not nearly doing enough. And yeah, there's no one solution for all. So we should not demonize, you know, any modes, but do different things, electrify, but then make sure that the energy is actually coming from renewables, but then also reduce car travel, move to active mobility, do demand management, all of that. And just start. So don't wait for the perfection. I think that is really important.
That's great. Michael, you have the last word, 10 seconds.
Yeah, a focus on light and ultralight mobility. So, you know, a transportation device that weighs 20 kilograms or maybe 60 kilogram microcar or e-bike will, you know, always be, you know, more energy efficient and space efficient than anything bigger, right? And from the city perspective, you know, make sure that there is the infrastructure on which this light and ultralight means of transport can safely move.
Great. Well, that concludes our session today. On behalf of the Pembina Institute and all our panelists, and a big thanks to the organizers. Thanks so much for hosting this wonderful, rich conversation.